Hello, everyone. My name is Jaime López. I'm a professor of audiovisual communication at the Complutense University of Madrid, in Spain. In this presentation, we will discuss the recent success of rural mythological thrillers in Indian cinema. This genre has always existed, given the frequent use of mythological themes in Indian films. However, the success of a movie like Kantara has led many to attempt to emulate it. We will first examine the Sustainable Developmental Goals, or SDGs, as the United Nations 2030 agenda related to cultural diversity, indigenous populations, and rural communities. Next, we will look at the rural population in India, its evolution, and the officially recognized tribes. Then we will provide a brief overview of Indian cinema that has addressed these rural communities and their conflicts. After that, we will focus on the 2022 film Yantara, which has achieved significant success and inspired other films aiming to replicate its achievements. We will discuss other recent thrillers on rural scenarios in the fifth section. And finally, in the conclusions, we will explore some possible explanations for this trend. So let's go with the Sustainable Developmental Goals, or SDGs. Regarding these goals, we can identify several of them related to rural communities and their needs. However, we will focus on those related to the protection of cultural diversity among indigenous peoples and traditional rural communities. These objectives include goal number 4, quality education. Target 4.7 promotes inclusive education that values cultural diversity and traditional knowledge. Then we have goal number 10, reduced inequalities, which advocates for the full inclusion of historically marginalized groups such as the rural areas. Then we have goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Target 11.4 calls for the protection of tangible and intangible cultural heritage, often found in these areas. And finally, goal number 17, partnerships for the goals. Target 17.16 emphasizes the need to collaborate with local communities for cultural sustainability. Beyond these sustainable developmental goals, there are specific international instruments that clearly and directly defend the cultural rights of indigenous peoples. The most important is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, which explicitly recognizes these peoples' right to maintain, protect, and develop their culture. Notable articles include Article number 8, which prohibits any form of forced assimilation or cultural destruction. Article 11, that protects the right to practice, revitalize, and transmit cultural traditions and expressions. Article 13, that guarantees the use and transmission of indigenous languages and communication systems. And Article 31, that recognizes the right to control and protect cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and collective cultural expressions. Also, we have the 2005 Convention of Diversity of Cultural Expressions of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and also the International Organization Convention 169, adopted in 1989 which is a legally binding treaty that obliges states to respect the values, beliefs, institutions, and languages of indigenous peoples. Together, the SDGs and the international legal frameworks provide strong support for the right of indigenous peoples to preserve, develop, and transmit their cultures and ways of life to future generations. So now let's go with rural communities and diversity in India. Regarding rural communities and diversity in India, it is estimated that approximately 63% of India's population currently lives in rural areas. Well, these are statistics from 2023. Although the rural population has been increasing due to overall population growth, its percentage of the total Indian population has been decreasing. This we can see in this graphic, this graph, where we see the first line on the top is the rural population. We see that in the 1960s, the population is around the rural population is around 400 million people, while in the 2023 is around 900 million people. But if we go to the second line, which is the percentage of rural population that represents with respect to the total population of India, we see that from the 60s to nowadays, it has decreased from approximately over 80% to a little bit over 60% that it is now. We can see this in this table where we show year, population, and percentage of total population. In 1965, as we said, over 400 million, it was 81% of the total. 1975 rural population is almost 500 million people, but the percentage is decreasing to 78%. 1985, same, almost 600 million people, it's on 75%. Then 1995, it's a little bit over 700 million people, but 73%. 2005, 2015, we're now below 70%. And in 2023, we've got like 63%, despite it's 900 million people living in rural areas. Besides, India officially recognizes 305 ethnic groups as scheduled tribes. In some regions, especially central India, they are often referred as Adivasis, meaning indigenous peoples. India has numerous laws aimed at protecting and recognizing the rights of these peoples, although the implementation of these rights is not always satisfactory. The main conflicts in these rural areas include unemployment and underemployment, issues that drive to rural exodus to the cities, unstable agricultural markets. The primary source of livelihood for these communities is often stable, and the lack of educational infrastructure. Rural schools often lack infrastructure and trained teachers. Healthcare deficiencies, there is a shortage of doctors, healthcare centers, and basic hygiene conditions, exposing communities to preventable diseases and high maternal mortality. Unequal access to essential services, another problem, with electricity, internet, and water scarcity due to irregular rainfall and poor management affecting agriculture. There is impact on women and girls. They often bear the daily burden of fetching water, and sometimes they have to fetch the water in places where there can be dangerous animals. may even kill these girls. And then we have that climate change intensifies droughts, floods, and crop losses. Finally, there are areas where there are violence, like in the so-called Red Corridor, where there are violent groups, armed groups that can be also dangerous. So, so how has been how has the Indian cinema treated these rural communities and diversity in Indian films? Indian cinema, we must say, has always have had a strong connection with rural areas. Many films have been set in these regions, reflecting the fact that a significant portion of India's population has historically lived in villages. Consequently, the target audience for these films has not only been urban dwellers, but also mm, rural communities, making these narratives deeply resonant across diverse demographics. Rural India is often served as both a backdrop and a central theme in Indian cinema, allowing filmmakers to explore the complexities of life in these areas. Thus, numerous films have addressed conflicts and themes related to rural communities and indigenous populations, highlighting their struggles and resilience. Their struggles could be maybe state power, displacement, marginalization, and systemic injustices. While some movies directly portray tribal life, others use rural settings to explore themes as poverty, caste oppression, and feudal exploitation. One of the most iconic examples of this kind of movies is Satyajit Ray's, one of the most prominent India's India's filmmakers. His film Padar Panchalis, released in 1955. It sensitively portrays rural poverty and marginal existence. Although not specifically about tribal life, the film captures the essence of life in a rural Bengal village through the story of Apu and his family. It highlights their daily struggles with poverty, while also celebrating the beauty and simplicity of their existence. Ray's neorealist approach ensures that the film remains authentic without romanticizing the hardships faced by its characters. Another significant work is Mrina Sen's Mrigaya, released in 1976. It explicitly addresses tribal exploitation during British colonial rule. The film tells the story of an Adivasi hunter caught between colonial authorities and local injustices, shedding light on the vulnerabilities of indigenous communities during this period. Similar, we have Shekhar Kapur's Bandit Queen, released in 1994, which dramatizes the life of Poonam Devi, a woman from a marginalized caste who becomes an outlaw to fight against systemic oppression. The film vividly portrays caste-based violence and gender inequality prevalent in northern India. Here we go for more contemporary depictions. In recent decades, Indian filmmakers have continued to explore themes related to rural communities while adapting them to contemporary context. For instance, we have Prakashya Chakra View, released in 2012, which examines violent clashes between Maoist insurgents and state forces in tribal areas, highlighting the neglect of tribal autonomy and rights. We also have Newton, released in 2017 by Amit V. Masurkar, which offers a satirical take on bureaucratic inefficiency through the story of an election officer stationed in a conflict-ridden tribal region. The film critiques how systemic neglect marginalizes indigenous voices. We can also go with Court, released in 2014 by Chaitanya Tamhane, that subtly critiques legal systems that criminalize tribal communities by showcasing how bureaucracy often suppresses their cultural expressions. These films brings attention to modern-day challenges faced by rural populations while continuing to foreground their resilience and agency. We cannot forget Shyam Benegal, who is one of India's most celebrated filmmakers. He recently passed away. But especially when it comes to portraying real life, we must highlight his work. His debut feature film, Anchor, released in 1974, is considered a landmark in Indian parallel cinema. Set in Andhra Pradesh, Anchor explores themes of class, caste, gender, and feudal power structures through the story of Lakshmi, a poor Dalit woman, and her relationship with Surya, an educated landlord's son managing his family estate. The film exposes deep-rooted inequalities without, again, romanticizing village life. Actually, Benegal, which we have the pleasure actually to interview him in in a conference on Indian cinema in Complutense. He was in Bombay. It was an interview online, but uh, Benegal, as we said, he continued to explore this type of um, rural communities in his films and this type of struggles in films like Nishant, released in 1975, which addresses feudal oppression, or Manthan, released in 1976, which focuses on cooperative movements among dairy farmers, and Schussmann from 1987, which highlights the struggles of hand-loom weavers against industrialization. These films not only depict real hardships, but also celebrate grassroots efforts toward empowerment. And of course, we cannot discuss rural narratives in Indian cinema without mentioning Mehboob Khan's iconic film Mother India, released in 1957. This epic drama centers on Radha, a resilient village woman who endures poverty, debt bondage to moneylenders, and personal tragedy while maintaining her moral integrity. Set entirely in a rural village context, Mother India explores themes such as agricultural labor hardships and women's central role in sustaining families and communities. Radha, character, presents her individual struggles to become a symbolic figure representing post-independence ideals of sacrifice and strength for nation building. The film's powerful visual storytelling and emotional depth established a lasting blueprint for representing rural India on screen. Despite its achievements, Indian cinema has sometimes struggled with authentic representation of rural communities, particularly Adivasis. Mainstream films have occasionally resorted to stereotypes that depict tribal people as savage or uncivilized, reinforcing harmful tropes rather than challenging them. Such portrayals highlight the need for more inclusive storytelling that accurately reflects the diversity and complexity of rural India. In conclusion, on rural narratives as cultural preservation, we might say that Indian cinema's portrayal of rural communities serves multiple purposes. One is cultural documentations. Films like Padar Panchali preserves traditional practices while highlighting socio-economic challenges faced by marginalized groups. 2. Social commentary. Works such as Anchor by Sian Benegal critique systemic inequalities rooted in caste hierarchies or feudal power dynamics. Then we have movies like Mother India that mm, serves to portray empowerment as it celebrates rural resilience while advocating for collective progress. And then we have global appeal by blending universal themes with authentic regional storytelling, even with the movies like Vegan, which was a blockbuster not only in India. Well, these films resonate with international audiences. Ultimately, Indian cinema continues to evolve by embracing diverse narratives that celebrate rural life while addressing pressing social issues, testament to its enduring commitment for cultural preservation amidst modernization pressures. So let's go now with Kantara, the movie that inspired this presentation. Uh, as we said, it was released in 2022. The Indian film industry witnessed the release of Kantara, a cinematic phenomenon that left a significant cultural mark not only in India but internationally. It was directed by Rishabh Shetty, who also wrote the script and played the leading role. Here we see Rishabh Shetty, um, and Shiva is the name of the protagonist of Kantara. Kantara is a rural mythological thriller that explores the tension between tradition and modernity, man and nature, and the role of spiritual belief in indigenous communities. What distinguishes this film is its deep cultural rootedness in rural areas and its focus on local rituals such as Butakola and Kambala. These elements, rarely represented in commercial Indian cinema, were portrayed with authenticity and emotional resonance, contributing to the film's widespread acclaim and box office success. We must remember that Kantara was the third highest grossing Indian film in India in 2022, and it was an unexpected success by the producers and by the director Rishabh Shetty, who says that he just wants to tell a story. He doesn't think about success. He didn't want to use any formula leading to success. And actually, he he he's speaking about himself or his own village as he shot the movie in his native village. And these rituals like Kambala and Butakola, they are from his native village. So it's a very personal movie for him. And there's a great commitment with the movie by this director. Um, as we said, Rishabh Shetty plays the protagonist, Shiva. Shiva, a rebellious, physically strong young man involved in buffalo racing, which is called Kambala, who lives in a village surrounded by dense forest. The narrative begins with a flashback to 1847, when a king donates land to the local villagers in a sacred pact with the forest deity, Panjurli. The villagers believe this land is protected by the deity and that its ownership is sanctified. As the story moves forward to 1990, the Indian government aims to reclassify the village as a forest reserve, effectively stripping the community of their ancestral lands. This decision sparks tension between government officials and the villagers, led by Shiva, who at first does not believe in the spiritual customs of his community, but gradually begins to reconnect with his roots. And here we have these two flashbacks, one to 1847, when this deity, Panjurli, gives the lands to the people that inhabit the forest. It must be said that Kantara means mystical forest. But then, before going to the present story, there is another flashback to 1970, where the deity Panjurli actually, and with the help of Gulija, who is a demigod related to it, they, let's say, kill a man from the elite that want to break the pact between the deity and the villagers, and in a corrupted way. So there you see how another action by this deity. And then the story goes to the 1990s, where we see this attempt to make the forest a forest reserve, and actually the actions of the villain, the antagonist of Shiva. Because as we say, Shiva is one of the main character. Then we have Leela, played by Saptami Gowda, the actress, and she's the girl from the village that goes to study to the city, but then goes back and start to work with the forest officers. So at some point, there is a conflict between Shiva and Leela. Then we've got the real antagonist, the Vendra, or the real villain, who is a man from the elite of the community that wants to get all of the lands in a corrupt way, even killing somebody, and finally wants to destroy and burn the whole village and kill many of their inhabitants. And then we have Murali, uh, who is a forest officer that at some point he's portrayed as the antagonist of Shiva, but in the end he joins the rural community to fight the Vendra, who becomes the real villain. So, as we see uh, in Kantara, according to the filmmaker, when he was asked in an interview, um, what are the main topics of your movie? He said, one is man, the conflict between human and nature. So the forest is very important, and the people living there, and the greedy people that want to get the forest maybe to make it make a city there or something, or road or something different than what it is. Those kind of conflicts. And then the other one is the so, so we have here um, we have one of the forest officers asking a man from the village, "You think this forest is your ancestral property?" This is when, in the beginning, they want to get the forest in order to make um, the forest reserve. That, of course, the people from the village do not want that. So there's one of the first conflicts. With respect to this motive, Kantara explores the fact that the villagers live in a form of sacred ecology. They do not own the land, but coexist with it. Forest is not merely a resource, it is deity, a living presence. Any attempt to disrupt this balance, either through legal appropriation or commercial exploitation, is seen as a desecration. The story positions ecological spirituality as a legitimate worldview and not superstition, because that is the second component of of the movie, according to Shetty, is the component of ritual and beliefs and these traditional beliefs, right? So first we have Panjurli. There is a deity, is a wild male boar, and is related to Galuji, who is a demigod, associated with it. And both are um, both expressed themselves in this ritual called uh, Butakola, which literally means the festival of the spirits, through this kind of medium that is incarnated by somebody from the community. At some point, it was Shiva, the main character, Shiva's father, but he disappeared at some point. And in the end, it will be Shiva who incarnates this medium. So, what are these rituals? As we said, one is the buffalo race, Kambala. Here we have a picture, an image of the real Kambala, and here we have an image of from Kantara, from the movie, with Shiva uh, riding the buffaloes. Actually, he wins the race, but some people from the elites manipulate the results, so there there is some kind of conflict. And then the Buddha Kola ritual, as we said, literally the festival of the spirits. What spirits? The Panjurli, the boar, and Galuji, right? This is an image of the real Buddha Kola, and this is a picture, an image of Buddha Kola in the movie. And then we want to highlight, of course, the sound is very important. Is the movie in this movie? Um, the I mean, the instruments, the music, the sounds, everything is related to this ancestral community, ancestral forest, this rural community, and these rituals. And among those sounds, we have this ancestral scream, let's say, let's call it that way, that is it's performed several times during the movie. Like here is in the 19th century, in the beginning of the story. Uh, this is the medium screams, uh, makes this ancestral scream that is related to the god. Then here we have in the Butakola, nearly in the end of the movie. And here we have in one of the visions that the protagonist Shiva has of this medium, uh, and he screams, or actually both screams, but is the god that first screams. This screams that is a sign of its presence, right? Then another thing that we mm, may highlight is the sense of community. Uh, how everybody joins to face the villain. And this is very common in many in the movies, of course, the power of the mass, right? Here is the community. We can see in the left the people from the village, but here, usually in many other films, is the population against the authorities, represented by the police, for example, or the army, or maybe or the friends of the villains, which is the case here. But here we see on the left, we see the village, the people from the village, and on the right, we see the officers that are joining them against the real village, the real villain, which is this man from the lead group of the community who wants to take all of the all of the land. Here we see The villain, he's in the center, the very center with the long kurta, and his minions, how they want to kill and destroy everybody in the village. Here in the right image, they're trying to kill Shiva. They finally killed Shiva, but Shiva is resurrected by Panjurli with the ancestral scream. The, with So here we see again the importance of this scream. After that scream, Shiva, there is a resurrection of Shiva. He kills all of the antagonists, and finally he becomes the medium for the gods and the semi-gods of the village. Here in the upper side, in the upper part of the image, we can see a little bit of the head of the wild boar, okay, of Manjuri. So that's the way Kantara ends. Uh, so what can we say about the success of Kantara? As we said, the filmmaker speaks about these two components, the human nature conflict and the rituals and beliefs, traditional beliefs, right? But several authors have tried to contribute and why this success, unexpected success. So some will say first, there is a rooted narrative. The film's success lies in its deep connection to the cultural and ritual traditions, which resonated strongly with Indian audiences. There is a unique blend in Kantara. It masterfully combines mythology, folklore, action, drama, thriller, offering an immersive and emotional experience. Authenticity. Shetty, the filmmaker, shot the film in his native village and incorporated real rituals such as Butakola and Kambala, adding credibility and emotional weight. This human nature conflict, the story explores themes like land disputes, conservation, and spiritual beliefs through two timelines, actually three timelines, with a strong sense of place. And we see Shetty's commitment, who trained intensively in mixed martial arts and ritual performance, taking on multiple roles, writer, director, and lead actor, driven more by passion than commercial goals, as he says in his interview. Also, he says that any region of India, and uh, we must take into account that India is a very big country. He says any region has these kind of rituals or traditions, not exactly these ones. But instead of an animal, it could be an old warrior or a forest deity, some kind of tree or something. The thing is that he says that any region of India can relate to this type of traditions, rituals, and beliefs. So he says that these could be some of the reasons of the success of Kantara. So let's say after Kantara got this big, very big success, as we said, it was the third highest grossing Indian film in India. So this is a remarkable fact. So other filmmakers and producers try to make movies similar with similar components or elements and to try to get that success. So beyond Kantara, several other recent Indian films, especially from 2023 and 2024, and we will include one from 2022, but I mean after Kantara, which was released in 2022. So several films have embraced similar rural mythological thriller formats. One notable example is Virupaksha from 2023. The title means literally the eye without form. It revolves around a mysterious curse passed through the gaze of a person who has died by suicide, spreading death to the first person who sees them, right? So there is a curse. This curse makes people to commit suicide, and whoever is the first to see that dead people, to see the eyes of these dead people, gets the curse and commits suicide. And so it's going on. And it, it begins again. There is a flashback. Begins during a pandemic. Um, it weaves together themes of collective fear, social punishment, and spiritual vengeance. The story: two individuals, a couple, are burnt alive, believed to be harming village children during the pandemic, and in her final moments, the woman places a powerful curse on the village, saying that the whole village will become a graveyard. Another movie is ARM, or which stands for Ayayanti Randam Moshanam, released in 2024. Another is Brahma Yugam from also 2024, and also from 2024 Garuda. We also have Vikrant Rona from 2022. They all explore also similar themes. These films often unfold across multiple timelines, such as from the beginning of the 20th century or the 1950s to the 1990s, and center on conflicts over land, rituals, and community identity in isolated or rural settings. Brahma Yugan, for example, delves into eerie rural superstitions, while Garudan tells the story of two childhood friends torn apart by a sacred land dispute. In Vikrandrona, the lead character investigates mysterious disappearances, including that of his daughter and wife in a village haunted by demonic myths. We also have other films like Goo, or the web series Aindam Vedam, or Kotukali, which have this type of belong a little bit to this subgenre of mythological thriller set in rural areas, trying to emulate a little bit, let's say, Kantara, after the great success of Kantara. But maybe the most expected film after Kantara with these topics and themes. Well, first, we would like to say that sometimes uh, the supernatural beliefs are real. No, for example, in Virupaksha, there is some kind of supernatural power in this woman who is the daughter of the couple who was burnt alive years before. But in other cases, like in Vikram Rona, it's just some people that want to convince the village that there are some supernatural entities, but actually they're just regular people uh, making people disappear and trying to take revenge from also past events. So now, yeah, we go back to this. The Secret of Death Kali, which has not been yet released, it will be released in April this year, and is expected to be a great blockbuster. But of course, we will have to wait for it. But we must say that mm, it explores these topics. And for example, in the trailer that was already released, one line says, "To the Hirania community, forest beings are like gods. They worship them. Now is the time to awaken God. When times are good, humans forget the divine." So we can see again these themes of rural areas, the trees, and also these supernatural powers in place, right? So finally, we're going to see the conclusions and possible explanations for the success of this trend of mythological thrillers in rural areas. We can say that in a predominantly rural area, rural India, even today, more than 60% of the population lives in rural areas. Although decades ago this figure was over 80%, as we saw, so many films are naturally set in rural worlds. But part of the success may be related to the fact that these films may be seen as a kind of cultural reaction to globalization and urban topics in films. Many films, especially those from Bollywood, are aimed at the Indian diaspora living in countries like the United States or the United Kingdom, or at international audiences watching via streaming platforms, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, many of these films are co-produced with American production companies seeking global success. As a result, the themes of many Indian films today are not so deeply rooted in what is genuinely traditional Indian. That is why subgenres like this one, a kind of mythological thriller set in rural areas, can find success at the box office, as we saw in the case of Kantara. There are Indian audiences who prefer the local over the global and urban. They want to see films that explore their own traditions and beliefs, or at least beliefs that are recognizable or translatable to their own cultural context. Stories that feel closer. As we've discussed, Kantara is a perfect example of this. A mystical forest and the gods who rise to defend their people. And that is all. Thank you very much for your attention.